out into this world, tiny little thing before its time, in a What? Girl, yes, tiny little girl, out into this, before her time, in a godforsaken hole called, no matter. Parents unknown, unheard of, he having vanished, thin air, no sooner buttoned up his breeches. She, similarly, 8 months later, almost to the tick, so no love, spared that, no love such as normally vented on the speechless infant. In the home, no, nor indeed for that matter, any of any kind, no love of any kind, at any subsequent stage, so typical affair, nothing of any note till coming up to 60 when, what? 70? Good God, coming up to 70, wandering through a field, looking aimlessly for cowslips, to make a ball, a few steps on and then stop, stare into space, then on a few steps more and then stop, stare again, so on, drifting around, when suddenly, gradually, all went out, all that early April morning light, and she found herself in the... What? Who? No! She found herself in the dark, and if not exactly insentient, for she could still hear the buzzing, so-called, in the ears. An array of light came and went, such as the moon might cast, drifting in and out of cloud, but so dulled, feeling so dulled, she did not know what position she was in. Imagine what position she was in, whether standing or sitting, but the brain What? Kneeling. Yes, whether standing or sitting or kneeling, but the brain What? Lying. Yes, whether standing or sitting or kneeling or lying, but the brain still in a way, for her first thought was, oh, long after, sudden flash, brought up, as she had been to believe, with the other ways, in a merciful God. First thought was, oh, long after, sudden flash, she was being punished for her sins, a number of which then, further proof, if proof were needed, flashed through her mind, one after another, then dismissed as foolish. Oh, long after, this thought dismissed, as she gradually realized, she was not suffering. Imagine not suffering. Indeed, could not remember offhand when she had suffered less, unless of course she was meant to be suffering, thought to be suffering, just as the odd time in her life when clearly intended to be having pleasure, she was in fact having none, not the slightest, in which case, of course, that notion of punishment for some sin or other, or for the lot, or no particular reason, for its own sake, things she understood perfectly, that notion of punishment, she had first occurred to her, brought up, as she had been to believe, with the other ways, in a merciful God. First occurred to her, then dismissed, as foolish, was perhaps not so foolish, after all, so on, all that vain reasoning, till another thought, oh, long after, sudden flash. Very foolish, really, but... What? The buzzing. Yes, all the time, the buzzing, so-called, in the ears, though, of course, actually, not in the ears at all, in the skull, dull roar in the skull, and all the time this ray or beam, like a moonbeam, but probably not, certainly not, always the same spot, now bright, now shrouded, but always the same spot, as no moon could. No moon, just all part of the same wish to torment, though actually, in point of fact, not in the least, not a twinge, so far. Ha! So far, This other thought then, or long after, sudden flash, very foolish really, but so like her, in a way, that she might do well to groan, on and off, writhe she could not, as if in actual agony, but could not bring herself, some flaw in her make-up, incapable of deceit, or the machine, more like the machine, so disconnected, never got the message, or powerless to respond, like numbed. Couldn't make the sound, not any sound, no sound of any kind, no screaming for help, for example, should she feel so inclined. Scream! Ah! Then listen. Scream again. Ah! Then listen again. No, spare that. All silent but the grave. No part. What? The buzzing. Yes, all silent but for the buzzing, so-called. No part of her moving, that she could feel. Just the eyelids, presumably, on and off. Shut out the light. Reflex, they call it. No feeling of any kind. But the lids, even best of times, who feels them? Opening, shutting, all the moisture. But the brain still sufficiently, oh, very much so at this stage, in control, under control, to this question even this. For on that April morning, so it reasoned, that April morning, the fixing with her eye, a distant bell, as she hastened towards it, fixing it with her eye, lest it elude her, had all gone out, all that light, of itself, without any on her part, so on it reasoned, vain questionings, all dead still, sweet silence as the grave, when suddenly, gradually, she realized... What? The buzzing. Yes, all dead still but for the buzzing, when suddenly she realized, words were... What? Who? No! She!